The term monster in RuneScape means anything attackable that isn't a player character, so things like a rat, this poor woman doing her shopping, rowdy slaves, a plagued frog, and Jake. They're all monsters. But in this video we're not going to talk about measly monsters like Jake here. We're going to have a look at the history of the strongest monsters of old school RuneScape. This video, by the way, is quite literally a wiki article. You can just read that instead. There's a link in the description. So without further ado, the strongest monster to ever set foot in the game is Combat Test. With a whopping combat level of 12,743, Combat Test along with its max hit variant, Combat Test Max Hit, are the most powerful creatures within old school's game files, and have been since May 2016. You might have felt safe in your player-owned house in the past, but now, I'd be careful. Those dummies aren't messing around. Well, unfortunately, Combat Test doesn't count. Neither does Zaros, who appeared in the sailing April Fool's joke a couple of years ago. Neither do the Dead Man mode guards with a elite combat level. The Arzanian being of Bordazan and Hazel from the Hazel Cult quest don't count either. None of these creatures are attackable, so they don't get on the official strongest monster list. It's dark. There's nothing. Until the 4th of January 2001, when RuneScape Classic was released. The first big bad ever in existence with a combat level of 46 was the Black Knight. He rained terror on the noobs of Gielinor, being the strongest monster in the game for 32 days, until in early February of the same year, the Moss Giant invaded the sewers of Verzik and reigned as the most powerful creature until their colder cousins were released with 6 more combat levels. The Giants were the strongest creatures until the Demons came. On June 11th, 2001, lesser demons with a combat level of 79 were strongest, and after going through puberty for 63 days, some of them became greater demons with a combat level of 87. One of RuneScape's most popular and iconic quests, Dragon Slayer, got released on the 23rd of September 2001, and it came with the game's most famous dragon, Elvarg. With a combat level of 110, Elvarg was by far the strongest creature and held that title for a whopping 157 days until the Black Dragons were released. It took 209 days of Black Dragon inbreeding before the abomination King Black Dragon was released. The KBD then held the strongest monster title for over 2 years. It remained the strongest monster in RuneScape Classic until the end of its days. It took 714 days and a new version of the game to overthrow the KBD. On the 7th of September 2004, the Calphite Queen was released with a combat level of 333, and she was able to hold the title for 392 days until the Fight Caves came out. All of the monsters I've just mentioned in this brief history do not make it into the top 30 list of the strongest monsters today. Next, the new boss on the block in old school RuneScape with a combat level of 1001 comes in at 7th place on the top 30 list. The original 4 God Wars bosses occupy the lower rungs on the ladder, with Kriara 27th, Ziliana 26, Grardor 23, and Krill 22nd. There are also some quest bosses that occupy the top 30. The Fragment of Seren, the hard Nightmare Zone variant of the Inadequacy is on there too, and Galvek. These creatures take up 29, 25 and 24 respectively. OSRS is filled with a lot of solo bosses which the player can take on their own. Most of which don't make it into the top 30, but some of them that do are the Crystalline Hunlif. The normal one, found in the Gauntlet, comes in at 21 with a combat level of 674. Its corrupted counterpart, which is way more powerful, is 9 places above it at 12th with a combat level of 894. Jad, the OG Jad from the Fight Caves, takes space 20 with a combat level of 702, and it actually took the throne of the strongest monster from the Calphite Queen on the 4th of October 2005. Jad then held that title for 1,077 days. On the 15th of September 2008, the Corporeal Beast was released and finally dethroned Jad. With a combat level of 785, Corp comes in at 16th place on the top 30 list. Ye Old Money Snake Zulrah takes place 19, and its sequel, Money Drake Vorkath, is right above it at place 18. The Nightmare of Ashishima was released, and although it was famously taken down by 5 idiots with dragon longswords, with a combat level of 814, it still remains as one of RuneScape's strongest monsters at 14th place. And over a year later, a much harder variation of the boss known as Fasani's Nightmare came out with 210 more combat levels and is the 6th most powerful creature in Galenor. There are still 14 open spaces in this ladder. It seems like a lot, but in reality it only takes 3 pieces of content to fill all of these rungs. The Chambers of Verzik take up 3 spaces on this ladder, but none of the smaller bosses within the raid take up a space. The Great Ohm himself takes up 3 spaces, the head and the 2 hands. They're depicted as one large creature, but are technically 3 individual monsters. Ohm's right claw takes space 28 with a combat level of 549. The left claw has 200 more combat levels than its twin, and it takes space 17th. The actual Grey Ohm himself, the head, with a combat level of 1043, takes number 4 in the battle of the strongest monster in RuneScape. When Chambers of Verzik came out, the title of the strongest monster went to Ohm after usurping the corporeal beast for the title. Corp had a good run of 812 days. Ohm, however, was not so successful. After only 6 months of being the most feared creature in the game, the Inferno was released, and with it, a myriad of powerful creatures. The Jalzek creature within the Inferno takes the bottom spot of the top 30 monsters in Old School. Then, 19 spots ahead, the more powerful Inferno variant of Jad takes 11th place with a combat level of 900. That's 198 more combat levels than its little brother. The big boy himself, with an incredible combat level of 1400, Zuck, takes 2nd place on the ladder. When Zuck was released, he was the big bad to beat, and although he's 2nd place on this ladder, he still remains the strongest monsters that players have to fight solo. Almost 1 year exactly after the release of the Inferno, the Theatre of Blood was released. Every creature you fight within the Theatre of Blood has an incredibly high combat level. The first boss players face in the raid is the Maiden, with a combat level of 940. That means she takes spot number 10. When moving through the raid to fight the Pestilent Bloat, players actually face a less strong monster. Bloat comes in at number 13. Then continuing to progress in the raid again, you face a boss further down on the ladder, the big spider guy. With a combat level of 800, he is 15th place on the ladder. Moving on and moving up, the 4th boss in the theatre takes spot number 8, and Zarpus after it takes spot number 9. And finally, last but the completely opposite of least, comes Verzik. When she's sitting on her throne, calm and collected, she is level 1040 and takes spot number 5 on the ladder. Once she gets tickled by a little staff, she finally decides to get out of her chair, which enrages her, giving her 215 more combat levels and taking spot number 3. Once you've defeated her, the creature's true form is revealed and you're facing a level 1520 creature, the most powerful creature Old School RuneScape has ever seen. And it's been almost 4 years since Verzik took the throne of Old School's strongest monster. That is the longest reign any creature has had with the title of strongest monster, but as OSRS continues to grow and expand, it won't be long before this video is outdated. Regardless, it makes a good timestamp in the history of Old School's strongest monsters, and maybe others can expand on it in the future. Thanks for watching, and like I said at the beginning, all of this information is available on the Old School Wiki, which is an incredible resource for Old School players. Any questions you have about the game can be answered there. Shout out to the Wiki team for their dedication. They're awesome. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe, leave a rating, maybe a comment too. If you didn't, well, it doesn't matter because dislikes don't exist, so unlucky I guess.